There are letters that arrive late, and then there are letters that were never meant to arrive at all. But what if one of them held the power to change everything? Thomas Whitaker was a man most people had forgotten, but he hadn't forgotten them. At 78 years old, retired and widowed, his life had settled into quiet rhythms, a morning cup of coffee, the same walking route through his snow-covered neighborhood, and long afternoons spent reading in silence. His children lived far away. The days were slow, predictable, lonely, but behind the stillness of his small Indiana home, up in the attic where dust blanketed forgotten memories, something was waiting for him. On a freezing February morning, he opened a weathered box he hadn't touched in over 5 decades. Inside, amid yellowed yearbooks and high school photos, was a sealed envelope with his own handwriting on it, faded, fragile, but unmistakable. It was addressed to someone he hadn't spoken of in over 50 years. Susan Brightman, his high school sweetheart. The girl who moved away just after they graduated. They had shared dreams, late-night phone calls, and promises whispered between bus stops and porch steps. When she left for Michigan, he stayed behind to finish school. He wrote her a letter asking if she'd wait for him, but she never replied, and he never heard from her again. He assumed she had moved on, forgotten him, married someone else. But now, staring at the envelope in his hands, he saw the truth. A red stamp, barely legible, marked across the front, returned to sender, undelivered. And for 54 years, he believed she had chosen to leave him behind. But the letter never made it to her, and suddenly everything he believed about their story was uncertain. That evening, with hands still shaking from the discovery, Thomas did something he'd never done before. He turned on his old computer, signed into Facebook, and posted a photo of the unopened letter to a local group. He typed slowly, carefully, "Does anyone know a Susan Brightman who lived in Michigan in the 60s? I wrote her a letter in 1969. I just found it. I never got to say goodbye." He hit post, closed the laptop, and went to bed expecting nothing. But the internet has a strange way of bending time. The next morning there was a message. "Hello, I think you're looking for my grandmother. Her name is Susan Brightman. She's still alive, and she remembers you." He stared at the screen. Read the words again. And again. She remembered. For the first time in decades, Thomas felt his heart race. Hope, something long buried, began to stir. But what he didn't know was that Susan had her own story to tell. A story that would change everything he thought he knew about the past. When Thomas arrived at the cafe that afternoon, he wasn't sure what to expect. His heart pounded with a strange mixture of nerves and disbelief. 54 years had passed. 54 birthdays, seasons, holidays, lives lived in parallel, separated by one lost letter. Then the door opened, and there she was, Susan Brightman. Silver hair, soft smile, eyes that hadn't changed since she was 20. For a moment, time folded in on itself. They just stood there, no words, just a quiet recognition of something once lost. Now standing just a few feet away, they embraced. It was gentle and cautious, like both of them were afraid they might wake up. But then Susan pulled back and said something Thomas didn't expect. "I never got your letter," she whispered. "But I wrote one too, and I thought you never replied." Thomas blinked. "You wrote me?" She nodded. "I mailed it a week after I moved, but I never heard back. After a few months, I assumed maybe you had second thoughts." Suddenly, a wave of realization swept over him. 2 letters, 2 lives, both silenced by the same invisible hand of fate. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, worn, yellowed, just like his, and across the front the same cold stamp, "Returned to sender, undelivered." They both stared at the letters, now reunited after 5 decades of silence. One lost in Indiana, the other in Michigan. Neither had ever reached its destination. "I kept it," Susan said softly. "All these years, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." They laughed, then cried, and for the first time in over 50 years, they began to piece together the fragments of what could have been, what still might be. But just as the conversation turned to lighter things, memories of high school dances, shared songs, missed moments, Susan looked down, her hands trembling just slightly. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said. Thomas leaned in. She took a deep breath. "I wasn't alone when I came here today." Thomas looked around, confused. Then from behind the cafe wall stepped a young man, early 50s, tall, quiet, with Thomas's eyes. "This is David," she said, her voice cracking. "He's your son." The world stopped. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the man in front of him. Decades of questions crashing into a single moment, all because the cafe was silent. Thomas Whitaker stared at the man standing just a few feet away. The hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the winter breeze slipping through the door, it all faded into background noise. David, his son, a name he had never known, a face he'd never seen, but those eyes, they were unmistakably his own. For a moment, no one said a word. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. His heart was pounding. He could feel it in his throat. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a revelation that unraveled 54 years of silence. Susan placed a hand gently on Thomas's arm. "I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks after I moved," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to reach you. And when I sent the letter, it came back unopened. I thought, maybe it was best to let you go, to let you live your life." Thomas looked at her, emotions warring behind his eyes. "You should have tried again." "I was 19, she said, her voice cracking. "Alone, afraid, and I thought you didn't want to be found." He turned to David, his son, a grown man now, a stranger who somehow felt familiar. "I didn't know," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I had known, I would have been there." David nodded slowly. "I know. She told me everything last year, when she got sick." Thomas froze. "Sick?" Susan gave a faint smile. "It's not terminal, just some heart issues, age catching up. I wanted David to meet you while there's still time, for all of us." Thomas sat down slowly, overwhelmed. "I missed your first step," he whispered. "Your school plays, your birthdays, your wedding. I wasn't there for any of it." David sat down across from him. "It wasn't your fault. You didn't choose this. Neither did she. Sometimes life just pulls people apart." A long silence passed between them. Thomas felt the weight of decades pressing on his chest. He had spent his entire life believing love was something he'd lost. Now he realized it had never been gone. It had simply been hidden, buried beneath time, distance, and 2 undelivered letters. "I don't expect anything from you," David said gently. "I'm not here to blame you or change my past. I have a family, a good life. I'm only here because Mom said you deserve to know. And maybe we deserved a beginning, even if it's late." Thomas looked at him, eyes misting. "I want to know you, if you'll let me." David smiled. "I think I'd like that." Susan exhaled, relief mixed with tears. The circle that had been broken for over half a century was slowly, miraculously beginning to close. The days that followed were a strange mix of rediscovery and reflection. Thomas and David met again, and again. They walked the same paths Thomas used to walk alone. They laughed, awkwardly at first, then more easily. They looked through old photo albums. David brought his own family to visit, the grandkids Thomas never knew he had. One night, Thomas sat with Susan on the back porch of her home. The stars above were quiet and familiar. "I used to imagine this moment," he said. "Us older, sitting somewhere peaceful. I just never thought we'd have it." Susan looked at him, smiling faintly. "I used to imagine it too, but I buried it for so long, I forgot what it felt like to hope for it." He took her hand. "We can't get those years back," she whispered. "But we can choose what to do with the time we have left." A few weeks later, Thomas stood before a small crowd. His first time speaking in front of others since retiring. It was a local community event on storytelling and legacy. He held up the yellowed envelope. "This letter was lost for 54 years, he said. "It was meant for someone I loved deeply. And because it never arrived, I lost decades. I lost the chance to be a father, a husband, a part of something beautiful." The room was silent. But that same letter, when it finally found its way home, gave me the most unexpected gift of my life, a second chance. He looked out at the audience. Susan was in the front row. David sat beside her, holding his daughter in his lap. I used to believe some stories ended before they were finished. But maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for the right time to begin again. That winter, Thomas moved to a small home closer to Susan. The two saw each other often, not like teenagers rekindling young love, but like old souls finally resting where they belonged. He began writing again, letters this time that were delivered, weekly notes to his grandchildren, birthday cards, thank you letters, handwritten reminders that no connection, no love is too small to protect. On Christmas morning, Thomas sat by the tree surrounded by family. Children laughed. Susan poured coffee. David handed him a small package. Inside was a wooden frame, and behind the glass, side by side, were two faded envelopes. His, hers. Two lives interrupted, now framed as one. He looked at David, tears in his eyes. Thank you. David smiled. For what? For giving an old man a future he thought was lost in the past. There are memories you carry your whole life, not in your mind, but in your soul. For Susan Brightman, that memory was a warm Indiana summer. 1969, her last day in town, the day she said goodbye to the only boy she ever truly loved. Thomas Whitaker. They had been everything to each other that year. Whispers beneath the stars, dreams scribbled in notebooks, stolen kisses at the edge of town. He had promised to follow her after graduation. She had promised to wait. But then came the move. Her father's sudden job transfer, a new city, a new life she hadn't asked for. Still, she believed in love. The night she unpacked her bags in Michigan, she wrote Thomas a letter. It was simple, full of hope, a little afraid. She told him she loved him, told him she was scared, told him she'd wait forever. If he asked her to, she mailed it the next morning and waited. A week passed, then a month, then 3. No reply, no phone call, nothing. Susan cried the day she stopped checking the mailbox. She told herself it was better this way, that he'd probably moved on, that maybe he never meant it in the first place. Her heart didn't believe it, but her mind convinced her to let go. She kept the returned letter tucked in a shoebox beneath her bed. Over the years, she built a life, married a good man, raised a child, but a quiet ache lived in her chest, like a song she could no longer hear, but never quite forgot. She told no one, not even her son, until the diagnosis. A failing heart, years of strain finally catching up. That night, she opened the shoebox, held the letter again for the first time in decades. Her hands trembled as she reread her own words, naive, romantic, brave. Tears spilled freely. She realized then she didn't want to leave the world with a secret buried in a box. So she told David, and for the first time, her son saw a piece of her past that made his own life make sense. He was a good man, she said. I believe he still is. I think you deserve to know where you come from. And maybe he deserves to know too. David promised he'd try to find him. She didn't expect much. But when he showed her the Facebook post, Thomas's photo, the letter he found, the trembling words he had written asking if anyone knew her, her breath caught. He still remembers, she whispered. After all this time, he still remembers. The day she walked into the cafe and saw him standing there, time shattered. He looked older, tired, but the moment their eyes met, she saw him, the boy with the crooked grin, the one who made her laugh in the library, who held her hand beneath the bleachers, who once called her his only. He hadn't changed, not where it mattered. And when she told him the truth about the letter, about David, she saw something in him break and rebuild at the same time. They had lost so much, but they still had something left. In the quiet evenings that followed, Susan would sit by her window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and watch Thomas play with the grandchildren in her yard. She thought about how many years they had missed, but she didn't grieve them anymore, because every laugh, every shared story, every look across the dinner table was a redemption, a reminder that some stories don't end when you think they do. They just take a long time to find their way home. She wrote in her journal one last time, love doesn't always arrive on time, but sometimes it's worth the wait. We were lost, and then we were found. In the end, not all goodbyes last forever. Some Just take a lifetime to become a hello again. And in a small wooden frame above her fireplace hung 2 letters, never delivered but never forgotten. A love story written in silence, now spoken again, one word at a time.